And we are back here with Empire of the Cop. We've got a very special guest for you here today. We have Neil Jones with us. How are you doing, Neil?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I'm very excited about some of the names on the list here. One I'm going to start off with, I presume you'll expect, is of course that of Khephren Thuram. I'm just curious how things are progressing here in terms of Liverpool's pursuit, because we've obviously got the delay of the European Championships, the Youth European Championships. Can we expect that once this is passed, signings will sort of start to filter through almost instantaneously?
No, I wouldn't like to promise instantaneously at any time in the transfer market. But I mean, I think the thing about the delay is the delay necessarily isn't because of the player. The biggest question marks surrounding this deal is club to club and what kind of fee Liverpool are going to pay for Khephren Thuram, what kind of fee Nice are going to want. That he's not a player that, as far as we're aware, has got a release clause, which obviously complicates matters. So I mean, you have to remember as well, obviously the international transfer window isn't actually open at this stage. There's still a few days before that opens. So I think when we talk about delay to the deal, I don't think it's necessarily a problem with the player side of things. I think it's more a club-to-club thing, and that'll be what determines, obviously, how quickly or if the deal gets done. It's not a case of like Alexis McAllister, where you know the price that you're going to pay. Sort of the other club don't have any real say in the matter. This is a little bit different, but I think the Euros does obviously complicate it when you're doing things like medicals and stuff like that. But I don't envisage any issues on the player side. It's all on the club side.
Brilliant stuff. I mean, we've touched on the complications there that it's providing, but I mean, it's also giving Liverpool a chance to look at a lot of the talent on their shortlist. You've got Ryan Gravenberch, Gabri Veiga, Manu Kone, Levi Colwill, Micky van der Ven for the Netherlands as well. What impression are you getting from the club in terms of how the tournament is affecting or even helping that decision-making process? Do you get the impression it is seriously helping to narrow down the search for the club?
No, I wouldn't say that. No, I mean, I think Liverpool tend to. I think it's more reinforcing or just underlining things. I think Liverpool have done. We have to. I know we have had issues at Liverpool's recruitment. We have had certainly in the last 12 months in particular. Bit longer, but I do think that we have to give them credit that they do the homework, and they do know that there's no breakout stars in world football anymore. There's no sort of idea that you go, wow, I've never heard of this player, and all of a sudden he's lighting up the Euros, or the idea that we thought he was a really good player, but we've just seen him play against Italy's under 21s and he's not that good. I think that they know sort of where they stand with a lot of these players. I mean, the sort of the sort of vibe that I've been getting out of when I've been checking these kind of things out with people at the club and around the club has been sort of that Thuram, Gravenberch certainly are very much at the front of it. Kone, Veiga a little less. I think Colwill is one that they'd love. I don't think there's any chance they're going to get him, but I think they'd love him. There's no question about that as a player. I think Chelsea are going to do all they can to keep him. I think they've already turned a bid down from Brighton. I mean, it's a strange one from the player's point of view, Colwill, isn't it? Because obviously he's had 2 really good seasons on loan, Championships, Premier League, stepped up, and just the impression that you always get is he just taking that risk of stepping back down and being a bench player and being someone who doesn't get much of a look in this season. Sorry, so that might come into play late in the window possibly, but I don't think Liverpool will get Levi Colwill at this stage. Van der Ven, another one, an interesting one. I think someone who we hadn't really heard too much about until recently, as a player. He's had a bit of a breakthrough season himself. So I think centre-back probably second on the list of priorities after the midfield. I think still expecting midfielders to be the next signing through the door at Liverpool, or the next major signing through the door, definitely. I think they need to sort that first before they start looking at what they're doing with the centre-backs, because that's the clear area of weakness. As I wrote in a piece recently, actually, that Liverpool had issues last season when they had 10 centre midfielders available. They still weren't able to get one on the pitch that was sort of suitable. They've only got 7 at the moment, plus Trent Alexander-Arnold. So I still think they need to bring in someone there.
Brilliant stuff. I'm just going to briefly sort of cycle back to the centre-back situation. Obviously, you mentioned midfield is rightfully the priority. We've mentioned both Levi Colwill and Micky van der Ven. There have been reports that Tottenham are considering Van der Ven alongside Edmund Tapsoba. Will this prompt some haste on the club's part? I mean, we've seen this previously. Interesting Tottenham again with Luis Diaz, and Liverpool sort of went in and thought we can't let this player go there. You know, obviously he's brilliant. He's been fantastic for us. Do you expect us to sort of swoop in if it becomes evident that Tottenham sort of go forget about Tapsoba? Van der Ven's our top target.
No, I don't know. I think, look, it would be remiss of Liverpool to go and spend key budget on a centre back when the midfield is as it is at the moment. They have to fix that midfield issue. That is the bottom line. Really, is that's what's cost them Champions League football last season, is not having that midfield sorted, and not having it fit for purpose for too much of last season. They have, listen, you might have doubts over them, but they still have 4 really good centre backs at the club. And they have some young ones as well, who, you know, or they have Nat Phillips who could potentially do it at this moment in time. Like, listen, of course, there are issues around them over injuries and age and things like that. But for now, they have what they need. So I don't see them sort of going, right, okay, let's just completely sort of about turn and let's go here for this. They will have a list of centre-backs that they believe are capable of coming in. I mean, the information I've had is anyway that it would have to be a young centre-back. I mean, I don't know whether Micky van der Ven is 22, whether that's young anymore, the way the football world works. You know, I hope it is. I hope it is, given I'm 38. You know, I'm hoping 22 is still young. but I think it would have to be a player who would be happy to be sort of 4th or 5th choice, and then would be ready to or capable of stepping up in a year's time when Joel Matip probably leaves, when Virgil van Dijk's obviously in 32, 33. So I'm not sure whether that lends itself to being a 40, 45, 50 million pound signing at this stage. I think it might be a bit less. But certainly the crucial issue for me is that the next sort of big move Liverpool make has to be a midfielder. They have to get that guarantee in, because McAllister is a good start to the summer, obviously a really good player who improves the first 11, but they still have a lot of weaknesses in that area. And, you know, I don't think they would make the same mistake as last year of believing that everything's going to be okay and that, you know, our best case scenario and Thiago stays fit for the whole year, Jordan Henderson plays every game, Harvey Elliott steps up. We've seen that risk taking isn't really viable. So I think Liverpool need to make sure that they've got their ducks in a row in that sense first.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, Neil, I wouldn't have said 38.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate that.
That's to be said. I mean, you mentioned McAllister there. I think the McAllister situation interests me quite a fair bit, especially if we're looking to bring in Thuram sort of alongside. We know McAllister's had a lot of joy down the left-hand side for Brighton. You know, he's formed relationships with Matoma, Estupiñán sort of at the left back. Do Liverpool know already theoretically where they'd look to I know this is sort of looking sort of far ahead into the future, but where they'd be looking positionally to sort of fit them in? Because plenty of fans have been concerned that, you've got 2 players there that seem very well suited for the left-hand side of the midfield. Obviously, Thuram himself is right-footed, I believe, so I don't know if that would perhaps lend himself. But in my mind, I've almost foreseen McAllister being moved. I reckon his attributes would be quite well placed on the right hand side of the midfield, and theoretically Thuram would sort of come into that. I don't know if you'd call it the Curtis Jones role now, or however the club sort of looked to sort of set up. Do you sort of foresee that as well?
Well, do you know what? I think that the fascinating thing is I think so much is open tactically with Liverpool at the moment. If you just look, I mean, we sort of. Yeah, we have a little bit of a recency bias because obviously we saw what happened in the last few months of the season. And we sort of maybe assume that that's going to be the case. I mean, I still see a world where Liverpool start next season with what we've always sort of known with Liverpool with the 4-3-3. We see, but they've got the flexibility to go to that box midfield. We've seen them do it at times, you know. And I do think that the presence of Gakpo and Nunes does lend itself to the idea of a 4-2-3-1 at times with Gakpo in the you know the 10, if you want to call it. So I think what. The key thing really is Liverpool just adding players that maybe you can put into 2 or 3 different positions in the midfield. And you look at a lot of the options that they have. You know, you could play obviously Thiago in a 4-3-3. I'm sure you could actually play Thiago a bit further forward. They actually tried it at Brighton without success last season. You've got Curtis Jones, obviously, who's played sort of a little bit in the front line, a little bit on the left of that, and he seems to really relish that box midfield. But he's played in a 4-3-3. Harvey Elliott's played on the right. He's also played in a 4-3-3. You've got Jordan Henderson can play sort of a bit deeper if needed be. So I'm sure, and McAllister is probably the most flexible of them all. You know, he's probably the one who you could plug in just about anywhere. So I think there will obviously be a tactical element to it, but I think more so from Liverpool's point of view is getting players in who are good, who are reliable, who are durable, who have a good physical profile and obviously a good deal of potential, and who are capable of sort of reacting to what the manager wants them to do. You know, we've seen really, you know, if you look at Liverpool signings, a lot of them have played in, you know, different roles maybe to what we're envisaged. You know, I think Gini Wijnaldum's probably the best example of them all. You know, he was signed. You wouldn't have said that he'd have become what he became at Liverpool. I don't think you'd have said, you know, at times you're watching Sadio Mane, who played on the right, was player of the season. He moved over to the left. Obviously, Mo Salah took that spot. Roberto Firmino obviously became that the false nine. You know, it is possible. Trent's obviously the latest one, so it is possible to change sort of a player's, or what we think of a player in terms of where they play, their natural positions, to put it like that. But I think the most fascinating thing for Liverpool is we don't yet know, and I think, you know, pre-season will be fascinating in that element. We don't know what they're going to sort of really commit to going forward. I'm still on the fence about whether, you know, they will really go for the Trent midfield thing, or whether that was just a sort of a stopgap while they were trying to sort of, you know, get a few other things in order. But I think there's a lot of potential and a lot of openness really tactically for Liverpool, and having as many versatile players as possible will really help that.
I mean, there's so much to consider there, actually. I know there's sort of plenty of expressed concerns about how Liverpool sort of look to form their plans to next season, but I'm actually personally quite excited. There, as you say, there's so many ways that we could go over the summer, and that's just, you know, for transfers, tactically, it's a whole different ballgame. You mentioned Trent's sort of hybrid role there, and obviously recently, you know, his England performances, I think Southgate's tried him in the midfield. He's excelled, admittedly, against weak opposition. I'm curious from your perspective in terms of pursuing the next, I suppose, a third midfielder. How much? What's a bigger factor in terms of? Is it how much sort of the second midfielder may cost? Will that factor into whether Liverpool do go for a third, or are Liverpool comfortable to an extent that they may not need a third because of the option Trent gives them in midfield?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really delicate one. I think that the Trent midfielding, because obviously he's such a unique player, and if you build your system around him, obviously you're beholden to circumstance, aren't you? You're beholden to him staying fit and in form, and teams not figuring that out. You know, you can't just say, oh, we're going to play that system, and if Trent's not available, we'll just put Joe Gomez in there. You know, it doesn't work, does it? You know, you can't. People can't do the same thing, so you have to change almost your entire team. You know, I think Trent being in there, I think it depends quite heavily on players who will do that, you know, that unselfish stuff. And, you know, whatever you think of Jordan Henderson, you know, I think he's been very, very sort of willing to do that and able to allow Trent to do it. It depends on the right side of the centre back being really, really quick and really, really comfortable defending, you know, big spaces 1v1. Canate, you know, the best, I think, of Liverpool centre backs at doing that. So it depends on him being available. So it is a very high risk sort of strategy to do it. I think what the biggest thing that's come out of the last, you know, 11 games of last season, and obviously the England games at the end of the season, has been that, you know, he can do it, you know, in certain games, and you know you can go to that. And whether you say, you know, you can commit to it for the course of a whole season, I'm a little bit more skeptical, and I'm not a naturally skeptical person when it comes to football, but I am a little bit with this. But at least Liverpool know that, you know, if the right personnel are available and the right sort of circumstances are there, yeah, they can put Trent into midfield. I think they could put him in a 4-3-3, but they could definitely put him in the box midfield, you know, the 3-4-3, if you want to call it. So I think it's good to have that in your back pocket. How it influences the transfers, I don't think it changes too much personally. The only thing it might change going forward is you might just look and say, you know what, we could do with another sort of fullback a guy who's a specialist fullback that in cup games, or when Trent's just not available and we have to go back to that system, we can put him in. Because if you think of what they've lost obviously James Milner, who filled in there quite regularly last season and in the years before. They've lost Calvin Ramsey, who had a poor, or rotten run of luck in terms of his injuries last season. He's gone on loan. He's a year behind where Liverpool hoped he'd be. They've got Conor Bradley, who I think is a real talent player, but is he going to step up from League One to play regularly for Liverpool? Possibly, but I don't think there's any guarantees. So there isn't an obvious sort of, beyond Joe Gomez, there isn't an obvious sort of player if Trent wasn't available to play as an out-and-out right-back. So that might be the area that is influenced most by this experiment, as opposed to midfielders, where I think Liverpool will be pretty clear on what they need and what type of player they need, and, what type of character and personality they're looking at.
You've mentioned personality. I think you've specifically sort of written about players having overcome adversity in their careers as being particularly attractive. I think there's plenty of examples, obviously, that we can cite within the Liverpool squad alone as it stands. I'm just curious about how that would factor in for Liverpool in terms of looking for the player after Thuram. Do you get a sense of someone they are prioritising? We've obviously brought up Ryan Gravenberch, who I think would fit the bill quite well. 6'3", physically dominant. You get the sense that, I think he registered 800 minutes maybe for Bayern last season. If I got maybe, I think at least it's an under 900. I'm pretty certain. So you get the impression there that it's a player that could really kick on with some trust behind him. Is that a player that sort of most fits the bill there if we do get Thuram in?
I think I'm really interested in Gravenberch as a player and as a signer. I've said this on a few different shows, funny enough, but he just, I think you're spot on. I think he does fit the bill. And listen, they don't all work, do they? It's one thing to say, we want a player who's overcome adversity. Some players don't, and some players or don't overcome it as spectacularly as others. You think of, if I just pivot away for a second. If you think of someone like Mario Götze, for example, who was targeted by Liverpool, you'd say he would be one, he was overcoming adversity, but he never really got back to that level, did he? So there is that danger that, you look at players who have maybe had a bad experience, and the bad experience, they become sort of, it extends. And so there is that danger. And I think there would be Liverpool fans who are looking at Gravenberch and thinking, well, what, you can't get in the Bayern side. He's obviously, there's obviously some reason for that. Why would we go and sign him? I just look at him. I look at the profile of the player. As you said, he's a big lad, but he's really technically good. He's really smooth and on the ball, and he looks like he can travel with the ball. He can pass the ball. I don't think he's got a great goal scoring record, but I've seen him strike the ball, certainly. And he's one of those players that you look and think, well, someone's getting something wrong there, because he was at Ajax, real sort of coveted player. Bayern, I think, got a really good deal when we all saw that deal go through at 21 million last summer. I think everyone thought, oh, that's a bargain. What a good move for everyone that is. And he hasn't worked out. Someone's doing something wrong. It's either the player isn't doing enough. It's either the coach isn't doing enough, or maybe it's just a sort of an environment thing where you sort of Bayern expects different things from certain players, or there's a different expectation. And I just look at that and think, well, if he's as good as he looked at Ajax, he's going to have a manager that's going to give him an opportunity, a manager who's going to give him the sort of the love and the attention that he needs. He's got a team around him potentially that could really sort of use those attributes that he's got, and he's got an environment in terms of the fans and the stadium that, if you're a young player and you've got something to prove, where would you rather prove it than Liverpool? You look at Anfield, and if you can get going early on in your Anfield career, you're going to be loved. You look at someone like Darwin Núñez, who didn't have a great end to the season. He had an up and down first season, but look at the love that he gets. He hasn't sort of absolutely smashed it at Liverpool, but he's adored every time he warms up, or where he comes on, or he does something with the ball. He gets his name chance. And I just think if you were a player that was sort of had a bad experience but still thought you were capable of playing at the top level, a move to Liverpool could be your absolute dream, and a move to Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp could be even more so. So I don't know whether it'll happen. I think it'll depend on Bayern more so than Gravenberch, but I am sort of one of those. I'm in the camp of Gravenberch as, if Liverpool could get that done, in addition to McAllister, and potentially in addition to Thuram. I would probably suggest, if I was being logical, it'd be one or the other. But if you could get both, I mean, that would be a pretty good restock of your midfield options. And I think there's a lot of potential in both of those players, but particularly in Gravenberch, just because of obviously the Ajax version and the experience of the Bayern. It doesn't always have to be damaging. It can also really be the making of a player, as we've seen with, for example, someone like Mo Salah, Kevin De Bruyne, previously at Chelsea. They had bad experiences there, didn't play, and went on to become superstars. So I know half of that with Ryan Gravenberch would be lovely.
No, absolutely. I think you're on the money there. The thing that most appeals to me is the fact that you would be bringing in Khephren Thuram 6'4", Gravenberch is 6'3". You're looking at sort of building a Liverpool midfield there that's not only sort of technically astounding, but physically dominant. We've seen this not necessarily needing to have players that hit above the sort of 6 foot mark. Junior Wijnaldum's a prize example. The stuff he could do with the ball. He was adept in possession. I mean, I'm getting off track here. I do want to come back to the Heiss equation, but I think firstly I want to touch on how Jörg Schmadtke sort of affects the general sort of transfer equation, because you look at sort of players there like Manu Kone, Gravenberch, both Bundesliga players, and you're thinking, well, Liverpool's first two signings potentially could come from the Premier League in Brighton and from Ligue 1 with Nice. So we've not even touched the Bundesliga yet. We've not even touched Schmadtke's links to Wolfsburg, Bundesliga, etc., etc. Does Schmadtke share the general sort of philosophy of Liverpool's sort of recruitment team around sort of overcoming adversity? Do any of the players sort of already sort of ticking that criteria for him?
I mean, it's hard to say. Obviously, we haven't heard from him in terms of we know what we know from sort of when he signed, and people did their research, and a lot of these these background pieces are made. I think one thing that he does share is obviously value. I think that and listen, it's not something that Liverpool fans or some Liverpool fans particularly like, but that idea that you find value in the market. Listen, he's done it at a different level. He's done it at Wolfsburg and Hanover and Alemannia Aachen and others. Where he's had to work on a budget, and he's had to cut his cloth, and he's had to maybe make 4 or 5 signings in the summer, as opposed to just putting all his eggs in one basket. I don't know off the top of my head, but I don't think he will have spent a great deal more than 20 million euros on a player. I think ever in his career, and that suggests that he's comfortable looking, in areas maybe that aren't explored as well. He's had some success with players from Scandinavia and from the Netherlands and places like that. I don't necessarily think those skills they're obviously transferable, because I don't think Liverpool are going to go and shop in Rosenborg or AZ Alkmaar or places like that. But what it does mean is he can obviously separate what makes a player worthwhile and worth a sign. And I think if you can move that up a level and move it to Liverpool, then you can start to look at it. There was an expectation. I think, to be fair, a few people I spoke to at Liverpool sort of suggested that they expected them to sort of shop in certain markets or be more strong in certain markets. And I'm guessing that was the Bundesliga, given his contacts and the amount of time he spent. But there's a sort of flip side to that. Obviously, there's this idea that, well, you've got great relationships with everyone in the Bundesliga. If you've been there for 20 odd years, you might have terrible relationships with some people in the Bundesliga. You might have clashed with them, you might have fallen out with them, you might have had bad dealings with them in the past. So there's no guarantee that just because you've got a German person in, he's gonna be able to get you great deals with German clubs. I think it depends on the player. I think the brief at Liverpool is pretty clear, I think, of what's needed. It needs to be a young player between sort of 21, 25. It needs to be a player that they believe has the right personality and will listen to what the manager wants and can adapt to what the manager wants. Player that ideally plays, more than one role, i.e. it's not a sort of a Claude Makelele sort of player. There's only one position that he can play in a midfield, or it's a fixed number 9. Who can only play a centre forward. It needs to be a bit more flexible than that. And generally, Liverpool look to do things where they've got a certain base level of experience in terms of the number of games they've played. 100, 150 maybe. And so they've got a good picture of what that player is going to produce, and I think Thuram falls into that. I don't know, Gravenberch probably maybe around there. Alexis McAllister fitted it. Obviously, Cody Gakpo fitted it when he signed in January. So I think there's sort of fixed elements to Liverpool's recruitment, and obviously it might then just be what's your relationship like with agents in terms of Schmadke? What's your relationship like with certain clubs that they can use them sort of expertise and skills? But I think the basic elements of what Liverpool are trying to do don't change, whether it's Julian Ward in charge or Jörg Schmadke.
Brilliant stuff. I'm just going to go over to Italy briefly, because there seem to be sort of non-stop links to Nicolo Barella. We've seen recently talk of Federico Chiesa, but I'm struggling to see a world in which Liverpool go for a midfielder, not a midfielder, beg pardon, a forward, when there's such an obvious need to go for a midfielder. So I won't dignify it with discussion unless, of course, you have anything different to say. I mean, Liverpool's admiration in the former is certainly well documented, but I think the problem for me isn't, because obviously he's a brilliant footballer, technically superb. He's a Champions League finalist. The issue for me is height again, because he's. If you're looking at the profile we've already brought in, McAllister's about 5'9", I believe. Barella's 5'8" or 5, right, roughly around that sort of mark. Again, you look at Thuram and Gravenberch, well over 6 foot. I understand Liverpool's interest. I'm struggling to see why they would go for it, though, if they're serious about, because for me, it's not just simply a case of, adding legs back into the midfield and dynamism. I think you kind of want physically imposing profiles especially if you brought in a McAllister first.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I would throw in as well. Just I think Barella probably is a little bit further down the curve, if you like, in terms of his age, the price that you'd be paying, how established he is, the amount of games he's played. I just think he's probably at the other end of that scale. Like you say, fine player, but yeah, there were times last season when you watched Liverpool, and it almost didn't matter who was playing in midfield, but when they looked soft, I would say, and they looked, I think of Brentford when they played just at the turn of the year, but I think of there was a game, Bournemouth, wasn't it? I think when they played Bajcetic and Elliott both played in the midfield, and you just wanted a little bit more sort of solidity in there. And if you look at the options that they've got left, obviously Fabinho, there's a big unknown about him, and we're all, I think, anyone who watches Liverpool, anyone who covers Liverpool, anyone who supports Liverpool, they're all praying that what we saw in the sort of much of last season isn't the real Fabinho. There's him. There's Jordan Henderson, who is, of course, when he's on the pitch, yeah, he's fine, but he's had some issues in terms of his form, and his age is obviously becoming a thing now. He's 30, 32, 33. So there's issues there. You've lost James Milner from there. You've lost Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Naby Keita. You've replaced them, or their places are being taken by Harvey Elliott, who I think there's still questions about whether he's an out-and-out midfielder. Stefan Bajcetic, who's under, he's 18 years of age and has played less than 20 games and has already succumbed to, a stress-related or a load-related injury, which is going to need some managing. So there's a doubt about him, not in terms of talent. You've got Alexis McAllister, who's a fine player, and you've got Thiago, who is a fine player, but is injury-prone, and then you've got Curtis Jones. So there's not a lot of guaranteed sort of players who you say, do you know what, I'm going to get 35, 40 games out of next season, and they're going to sort of be part of this dominant midfield. There's a lot of question marks around it. So I think you want as many sort of potential options that are going to be on the pitch, but when they are on the pitch, you're going to be able to do the basics as well as the quality bits of Liverpool. And the basics for me involve winning your duels and working off the ball and being in the right position. That is the key. And I think it's very telling towards the back end of last season with Jürgen, where he said the ticket into this team is the counter press. That was the way he said it, wasn't it? The ticket into the team is the counter press. That was why Curtis Jones was starting the last few games. That was why Diogo Jota started so many games towards the back end. It was why probably Darwin Nunez didn't. It was why Thiago didn't. It was about that sort of legs, energy, but also the ability to, when you do press and when you are in that position, that you can actually win the ball as well, and you need a bit of physicality for that. And I completely agree with you. I think, as much as I think he's a fine player and an excellent, would be. Listen, I would, if Liverpool signed him, I wouldn't be saying, terrible signing. But but if I look at someone like Barella compared to maybe someone like Thuram, even Gravenberch, I'm looking and saying, well, do you know what? That player doesn't fix as many of the issues we saw last season as maybe Thuram would.
Just lastly, we're getting into potentially silly territory here, but I think it's territory worth exploring given our prior links and obviously our well-documented prior interest. Real Madrid's Aurelien Tchouameni. Roman has already sort of reported on this and have made very abundantly clear that Madrid want to hold on to him. That's totally understandable given the quality of the player there. I'm just curious to what extent, I mean, you've got Bellingham's arrival to consider. I know obviously he's not a traditional sort of holding midfielder, though is certainly capable of playing in the 68 and the 10. Then you've also got all the reports that have come out of late of Madrid sort of interest in Mbappe, and we know that that's a player that's most definitely not going to go cheaply if he does go this summer amid all the turmoil around sort of PSG. Is there any world in which Madrid would sort of seriously consider selling Tchouameni and where Liverpool would be keen to capitalise on that?
Well, I think the latter. I think Liverpool surely would be keen to capitalise if Real Madrid was selling, because they wanted them badly, obviously, the year before. So I can't see why Liverpool would say, "Oh no, not now," unless it was a £100 million, etc. plus. But I don't personally see the world where Real Madrid say this is they went to great lengths to get him. They paid a lot of money for him. If you think you're buying a player from Monaco, albeit a very gifted player and a very, very talented player, they still spent a lot of money to buy a player from Liga, not a forward, not a sort of, an Mbappe. To do it after 1 year when he had a decent start to the season. I think he had a poor second half after the World Cup. I feel like he maybe tailed off a little bit. Obviously, we didn't really see him. He didn't start the 2 games against Liverpool, for example. Wasn't in the side in the Champions League when we saw them against City. But I think they've committed to him. They're undergoing a big change with their midfield. I think there's a possibility I've seen with Modric potentially going over to Saudi. That's been linked. I know Kroos has just signed a new contract, but Casemiro left, obviously. So I think they envisaged Tchouameni stepping into that sort of deeper line midfield, and I still think that would be the case. There'll be a lot of opportunities for him next season. And they've got a real sort of stable of young midfield players there, haven't they, that they've developed with Bellingham, with Camavinga, with Tchouameni, with Valverde. And I don't see why Real Madrid would sort of look to, having done all that work and got that sort of that stable in place, before they've lost all their sort of their icons from midfield. Having done all that work, I don't know why they would sort of suddenly disrupt that. So I think Liverpool's interest is permanent, pretty much with Tchouameni, but I don't see a situation where Real Madrid look to sell him this summer. It would be a huge surprise, put it that way, if they were to do it. And the other thing I suppose to say is I don't think Liverpool would be the only ones who'd be waiting there to see what the kind of price was. I think there'd be a few clubs, put on red alert if Real Madrid put that guy up for sale.
I'd be very curious to see what happens then. I think you'd hope certainly Liverpool will be at the front of that queue, given that they're probably the sort of second most interested side. Well, that's everything from us today. Just lastly, Neil, I just want to check, have you got any sort of exciting projects, anything in the pipeline that you'd like to share? And obviously you've got Covering Liverpool now, which is where you're sharing all some pertinent news relating to the club.
Yeah, well, I'll start with that, to be honest. I mean, that's sort of something I've launched last week. It comes down to circumstance. Obviously, left goal at the end of last season, and you're looking going forward, a few options in your way up, and you think, well, no, covering Liverpool is what the future holds, isn't it? So why not put some time into that? So yeah, we've got that, the subscription service. Listen, I understand the world, and there's a lot of subscription services, and everyone's looking for the same kind of audience. So I completely understand reservations people have or things like that. But I'm looking to give as much good content as possible. Obviously, it helps when the players are back in training. There's games and rhythms and things like that around. And I'll still be at press conferences. I'll still be at games. I'm hoping to get over to Germany for the Karlsruhe game later this month. There's some under 21, under 18 coverage as well that'll be coming once those games start up and running. So yeah, the aim is to be as busy as possible and be across as much as anything. And the good thing about covering Liverpool, as in the act as opposed to the site, covering Liverpool is always busy, and you've always got something to talk about. There's always something going on. Even if there's nothing going on, we talk about why there's nothing going on, don't we? So there's always plenty to get your teeth into, and I'm sure I, like just about everyone else is really looking forward to seeing the players back on July the 8th, and then I think hopefully we'll start to get a clearer picture of what the next season could look like for Liverpool. I think we're all hoping for. I think, to be honest, I'm expecting it as well, but we're all hoping for a real improvement on last season, aren't we? And we're hoping that Liverpool sort of are a little bit more like themselves from the word go, and we don't have another autumn like last year and another winter like last year, because I don't think I'll be getting many new subscribers if we go down into that January again.
No, I don't think we will either, to be honest with you. I'll be rather depressed if we get to that sort of stage of the season and things haven't sort of significantly improved. But, we've started really well. We've brought in McAllister. I'm absolutely adore. I think it looks like it's shaping up to be potentially the perfect summer and ensuing season to get on board with covering Liverpool and beyond. So they can go and follow that on your Substack. And also there's your Twitter at Neil Jones Goal. The fans can go ahead and follow, give a like, subscribe on our YouTube account where this will be going. And I believe this will also be popping up on our Substack as well for those of you who've been keeping track of that. But for now, that's everything from us today. We've had Neil Jones here from Covering Liverpool. Thank you very much for joining us.